Two military helicopters tore through the gray dawn sky and slammed onto the rain-slicked highway, rotors screaming, forcing cars to swerve and brake in chaos. Soldiers in full combat gear spilled out before the blades even stopped spinning, boots hitting asphalt hard, weapons ready, eyes scanning the frozen traffic. They weren't looking for a criminal. They weren't looking for a hostage. They were looking for a nurse, a woman who'd been fired 3 hours ago for refusing to let a dying man be thrown into the street. The woman clutching a soggy cardboard box, soaked to the bone, walking home in shame. The woman they were about to make untouchable. If you want to see how far this story can go, hit that like button, drop a comment with your city, and stick with me until the very end. You won't believe what happens next. The rain had started just after midnight, and by 4 a.m, it was a cold, relentless sheet that turned the streets of Ashford City into rivers of reflected neon and misery. Emily Warren didn't have an umbrella. She didn't have a coat that worked anymore either. The zipper had broken 2 weeks ago, and she'd been meaning to replace it. But nurses didn't get paid enough to prioritize things like that. So she walked, arms wrapped around a cardboard box that was disintegrating in her hands, her scrubs clinging to her skin, her sneakers squelching with every step. Inside the box, a coffee mug her mother had given her when she graduated nursing school, a stethoscope with her initials engraved on the chest piece, a framed photo of her and her younger brother at the beach, back when things were simpler, a half-empty bottle of hand sanitizer. That was it. 7 years of her life at Crescent General Hospital, reduced to objects that could fit in a box she'd grabbed from the supply closet on her way out. She'd been escorted out by security, not because she'd stolen anything, not because she'd hurt anyone, because she'd saved someone. That was the part that made her want to scream. Her supervisor, a wiry woman named Patricia Langford who wore her authority like a weapon, had stood in the hallway outside the ICU and delivered the news with all the warmth of a parking ticket. "You're done here, Emily. Clean out your locker and leave the premises immediately." Emily had stared at her, water still dripping from her hair because she'd just come out of a patient's room where she'd been running fluids and antibiotics against direct orders. "You're firing me for keeping someone alive?" "You're being terminated for insubordination," Patricia replied, her voice flat and final. "Doctor, Adrian Cross gave you a direct order to discharge the patient in bed 12. You ignored it. That's grounds for immediate dismissal." "That patient was dying." "That patient," Patricia interrupted, "was uninsured, unidentified, and taking up a bed we need for paying customers. You don't get to make those calls, Emily. You're a nurse, not a doctor, and certainly not an administrator." Emily's jaw tightened. "So we just let people die if they can't pay?" Patricia's expression didn't flicker. "We follow hospital policy. You didn't. Now leave before I have you removed." And that was it. No hearing, no chance to defend herself, no acknowledgement that the man in bed 12 had been brought in with a fever spiking at 104, a rash spreading across his torso, signs of septic shock setting in fast. No recognition that Emily had seen those symptoms before. Rare, dangerous, the kind of thing that could kill in hours if untreated. She'd started an IV, pushed broad-spectrum antibiotics, monitored his vitals every 15 minutes. She'd kept him alive. And for that, she'd been fired. Now she was walking home in the rain, past shuttered storefronts and empty bus stops, past the kind of people who only came out at this hour because they had nowhere else to go. Her phone was dead. Her wallet had $12 in it. Her apartment was 45 minutes away on foot, and she didn't have the energy to care anymore. She thought about her brother. He'd told her once, years ago, that she cared too much. "You can't save everyone, Em," he'd said. "You're going to burn yourself out." He'd been right. She turned a corner onto Riverside Avenue, a long stretch of cracked pavement that ran parallel to the old industrial district. This time of night, it was deserted except for the occasional truck rumbling past, headlights cutting through the rain. She kept her head down, focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trying not to think about what came next. How she'd pay rent. How she'd explain this to her family. How she'd ever work in healthcare again with a termination on her record. The sound started small. A distant hum, barely audible over the rain. Then it grew. Emily stopped walking. She looked up. The sky was still dark, bruised with clouds, but there was something moving in it now, something fast and low, cutting through the storm like a blade. The hum became a roar, The roar became a hurricane. Two helicopters dropped out of the clouds and slammed onto the highway 50 yards ahead of her, rotors screaming, downdraft flattening the rain into horizontal sheets. The noise was unreal, mechanical thunder that rattled her ribs and made her ears ring. The few cars on the road swerved and skidded to a stop, headlights washing over the black machines now sitting in the middle of the highway like insects from another world. Emily stood frozen, box clutched to her chest, rain pouring down her face. The side doors of both helicopters snapped open. Soldiers poured out, 8, 10, 12 of them, dressed in full tactical gear, helmets, rifles, moving with the kind of precision that made it clear this wasn't a drill. They fanned out across the highway, boots splashing in puddles, eyes scanning, voices shouting over the noise. "Secure the perimeter. Check all vehicles. Find her, now!" Emily's heart slammed into her throat. Her first instinct was to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Her second instinct was to drop the box and put her hands up, but she couldn't make sense of what was happening. Why were soldiers here? Why were they stopping traffic? Why? One of them spotted her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a helmet with a visor that reflected the streetlights. He pointed directly at her and shouted something into a radio, then started running toward her, his boots hammering the pavement. Emily took a step back. Then another. The box slipped from her hands and hit the ground, the mug inside shattering with a sound she barely heard. The soldier reached her in seconds. He stopped 3 feet away, breathing hard, rain streaming off his helmet. "Emily Warren?" She couldn't speak. She nodded. He turned and shouted over his shoulder. "I've got her!" 2 more soldiers sprinted over, flanking her on either side. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and a scar across her jaw, looked her up and down, then spoke into her radio. "Target acquired. Stand by for transport." "Wait," Emily's voice cracked. "What's happening? Why are you—" "Ma'am, we need you to come with us immediately." The first soldier's tone wasn't threatening, but it wasn't a request either. "You're being recalled to Crescent General Hospital under military authority. We don't have time to explain." "Recalled?" Emily's mind was spinning. "I was just fired." "Not anymore," the woman said. "You're coming with us. Now." Before Emily could protest, they were moving. 1 soldier on each side, hands firm but not rough on her arms, guiding her toward the nearest helicopter. The rotors were still turning, the noise deafening, the downdraft whipping her wet hair into her face. She stumbled once, and they caught her, kept her moving, kept her upright. "Wait, my things. Leave them." "I don't understand." "You will." They reached the helicopter and hauled her inside. The interior was all metal and straps and harsh red lighting. 2 more soldiers were already seated, helmets on, rifles secured. One of them handed her a headset and gestured for her to put it on. She did, her hand shaking so badly she could barely get it over her ears. The door slammed shut. The engine roared. The helicopter lifted off the ground with a lurch that made her stomach drop. Through the window, Emily watched the highway fall away beneath them, the cars and streetlights shrinking into insignificance. The rain battered the glass. The city spread out below, dark and vast and indifferent. She turned to the soldier sitting across from her. "What's going on?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her with an expression she couldn't read, something between respect and urgency. The flight took less than 10 minutes. When the helicopter began to descend, Emily looked out and saw Crescent General below them, its white towers lit up like a fortress. The landing pad on the roof was already surrounded by vehicles, military vehicles, black SUVs, figures moving in coordinated patterns. They touched down hard. The door opened before the rotors stopped. Someone grabbed her arm and pulled her out into the wind and noise and chaos. "This way!" She was escorted across the roof, through a door, down a stairwell she'd walked 1,000 times but had never seen filled with armed soldiers. They moved fast, boots echoing, radios crackling, voices clipped and professional. They reached the ICU floor. The hallway was packed. Staff members pressed against the walls, staring, whispering. Patricia Langford stood near the nurses' station, her face pale, her mouth open. Dr. Adrian Cross was there too, his expensive suit wrinkled, his expression a mixture of confusion and indignation. The soldiers didn't stop. They walked Emily straight past them, straight to the room she'd been fired for entering, bed 12. The door was open. Inside, monitors beeped steadily. The man she'd saved, the man with no name, no insurance, no identification, was still there, still alive, an IV in his arm, oxygen running, his chest rising and falling with steady breaths. And standing next to the bed, arms crossed, was a man in a spotless military uniform covered in medals and insignia Emily didn't recognize. He was older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. His eyes were the coldest thing she'd ever seen. He turned to look at her. "Nurse Warren." Emily's mouth was dry. "Yes, sir." "I'm General Nathan Cross," he said, "and the man you saved is my son." The world tilted. Emily looked at the patient in the bed, the homeless man, the unidentified John Doe, the dying man she'd been ordered to discharge. And for the first time she saw him clearly. The hard lines of his face, the scars on his hands, the kind of build you only got from years of brutal physical training. "Your son," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Captain Daniel Cross," the general said, Special Operations. He was poisoned during a classified mission 2 days ago. When he collapsed, he was brought here under a false identity for his protection. The infection you treated wasn't random, Nurse Warren. It was a weaponized pathogen designed to kill within 72 hours. You diagnosed it. You treated it. You saved his life when every other person in this hospital was ready to let him die. Emily's knees went weak. She grabbed the doorframe to steady herself. The general stepped closer, his voice dropping to something quieter, but no less intense. "Dr. Adrian Cross." He glanced toward the hallway where the doctor was standing, his face now drained of all color. "Is my brother. And he tried to have my son killed." The words hung in the air like a blade. Emily's head snapped toward the hallway. "Doctor." Cross was backing away, his hands raised, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Arrest him." 3 soldiers moved instantly, converging on Dr. Cross, grabbing his arms, forcing him to the ground. He shouted something, protest, denial, panic, but it was drowned out by the metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut. Emily stood there, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. The general turned back to her. "You were fired for saving my son's life. That ends now. As of this moment, you are reinstated with full authority. You will oversee his care personally. No one in this hospital outranks you. No one." Patricia Langford appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. "General, You're done," he said without looking at her. "Security will escort you out." Patricia opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away without another word. The general's gaze returned to Emily. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, Nurse Warren?" Emily swallowed hard. I think so." "Good." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the bed. "Then get to work. My son's life is still in your hands." Emily moved on instinct, crossing to the bed, checking the monitors, the IV line, the oxygen saturation. Her hands were steady now. Her mind was clear. This was what she knew. This was what she was good at. Behind her, the general spoke quietly into a radio. "Secure the building. No one leaves until I say so, and get me everything we have on who else knew about the captain's location." Emily adjusted the IV drip, her eyes on the patient, no, on Captain Cross, and realized with a strange, cold clarity that everything had just changed. She'd been fired for doing her job, and now she was standing in the middle of a military operation with the general telling her she was untouchable. The man in the bed stirred. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, struggling to find her. Emily leaned closer. "You're safe," she said softly. "You're going to be okay." His lips moved, a whisper, barely audible. "Thank you." She nodded, blinking back something that might have been tears, and turned back to the monitors. Outside the room, soldiers moved through the hallway with grim efficiency. Staff members were being questioned, doors were being locked. The entire hospital was being locked down. And somewhere in the chaos, handcuffed and silent, Dr. Adrian Cross was being dragged toward an exit he'd never walk back through. Emily took a breath, steadied herself, and got back to work. Kom Chuen Sang document. Moi ba jo, bon moi bon foot. The monitors beeped in steady rhythm, a sound Emily had heard 10,000 times before. But tonight it felt different, like a heartbeat she was personally responsible for keeping alive. She checked the IV flow rate again, adjusted the angle of the oxygen cannula, and made a note on the chart, even though her hands were still trembling slightly. Captain Daniel Cross's vitals were stable. Not good, not out of danger, but stable. That was something. Behind her, the general spoke quietly into his phone, his voice a low rumble that cut through the sterile air like distant thunder. I want a full security sweep of every floor. No exceptions. And pull the surveillance footage from the last 72 hours. I want to know everyone who came within 50 feet of this room. Emily didn't turn around. She focused on the patient, on the rhythm of his breathing, on the faint color returning to his face. He was younger than she'd initially thought, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of lean, hard build that came from years of conditioning. His hands, resting on top of the thin hospital blanket, were scarred and calloused. Soldiers' hands. She'd saved a soldier's life, a captain, a son, and she'd been fired for it. The absurdity of it should have made her laugh, but instead it made her furious. She thought about Patricia Langford's cold dismissal, about Dr. Adrian Cross's smug indifference, about the way they'd both looked at the man in this bed and seen nothing but a financial inconvenience. It made her sick. The general ended his call and stepped closer to the bed. Emily moved aside instinctively, giving him space, but he didn't reach for his son. He just stood there, looking down at him with an expression that was impossible to read. Grief, anger, relief, all of it locked behind the kind of iron control that only decades of military discipline could forge. "How bad is it?" he asked without looking at her. Emily hesitated, then decided honesty was the only option. "The infection was severe. Septic shock was setting in when I started treatment. If he'd been discharged like Dr. Cross ordered—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The general's jaw tightened. "But he wasn't." "No, sir." "Because you refused the order?" "Yes, sir." He turned to look at her then, and for the first time she saw something other than cold authority in his eyes. It might have been gratitude. It might have been respect. "You understand what that means, don't you? You saved my son's life by disobeying a direct order from a senior physician. Most people wouldn't have done that." Emily met his gaze. "Most people aren't nurses." A faint smile ghosted across his face, there and gone in an instant. "No, they're not." The door opened and a soldier stepped inside, the same woman with the scar on her jaw who'd helped pull Emily into the helicopter. She saluted sharply. "General, we've secured the building. All exits are locked down. Hospital administration is requesting to speak with you." "Tell them to wait," the general said without turning around. "Yes, sir." The soldier hesitated. "Sir, we've also identified 3 individuals who accessed this room in the last 48 hours without proper authorization. 2 orderlies and 1 administrator." The general's expression went flat. "Bring them to me." "Already in custody, sir." "Good." He glanced at Emily. "Nurse Warren, I need you to walk me through everything that happened from the moment my son was admitted to this hospital. Every detail, every conversation, every person who touched him." Emily's mind raced. She hadn't been the admitting nurse. She'd only been called in after the patient started deteriorating. But she'd read the chart. She'd seen the notes. She'd talked to the night shift staff. "He was brought in around 11 p.m. 2 nights ago," she began, her voice steady now, clinical. "No identification, no wallet, no phone. The paramedics said they found him unconscious near the old rail yard on the south side. He was feverish, disoriented, covered in sweat. Initial assessment showed elevated heart rate, low blood pressure, and a rash spreading across his torso and arms." The general listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on his son. The attending physician, Dr. Marcus Hale, ordered standard blood work and fluids, then moved on to other patients. No one flagged it as urgent. Emily paused, choosing her words carefully. "But I saw the rash when I came on shift yesterday morning. It wasn't normal. The pattern, the color, the way it was spreading, it looked like something I'd seen before. Back when I worked at County General. We had a case 5 years ago. A contract worker who'd been exposed to industrial chemicals overseas. Same presentation, same rapid progression." The general's eyes narrowed. "You recognized it?" I suspected it, Emily corrected. I couldn't be sure without lab confirmation, but I didn't have time to wait for that. His fever was spiking, his vitals were crashing, so I started broad-spectrum antibiotics and contacted infectious disease for a consult. And Dr. Adrian Cross shut it down. The words came out harder than she intended. He said the patient was uninsured and unauthorized. He ordered me to discharge him immediately. When I refused, he had me escorted out of the room. I came back an hour later and started treatment anyway. The general was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and dangerous. My brother tried to kill my son. Emily didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The door opened again and 2 more soldiers entered, escorting a man in handcuffs. One of the orderlies Emily vaguely recognized from the night shift. He was young, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and a face that had gone pale. The soldiers pushed him into a chair against the wall and stood on either side of him. The general turned slowly, his gaze locking onto the orderly like a targeting system. "What's your name?" The young man swallowed hard. "Trevor. Trevor Mills." "Trevor." The general's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I'm going to ask you some questions, and you're going to answer them honestly. If you lie to me, even once, I will have you charged with conspiracy to commit murder against a federal officer. Do you understand?" Trevor nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. I swear. I didn't know. Did Dr. Adrian Cross give you any instructions regarding the patient in this room?" Trevor's eyes darted to the bed, then back to the general. He told me to disconnect the IV if the nurse on duty left the floor." Emily felt her stomach drop. The general didn't react. "When did he tell you this?" "Yesterday afternoon. He said the patient was being discharged and we needed to clear the bed, but he didn't want to cause a scene. He said if the nurse stepped away, I should just pull it out. Make it look like an accident." "And did you?" "No, sir." Trevor's voice cracked. "I was going to, but the nurse—" He glanced at Emily. "She never left. She stayed in the room for hours. I didn't get a chance." The general stared at him for a long, silent moment. Then he turned to the soldiers. "Take him to holding. Separate cell. No contact with anyone." They hauled Trevor to his feet and dragged him out. He didn't resist. Emily felt numb. She'd known Dr. Cross was arrogant, profit-driven, willing to bend ethical rules to keep the hospital's financials in the black. But this was something else entirely. This was premeditated. This was attempted murder. The general turned back to her. "You saved my son twice. Once by treating him, and once by refusing to leave his side." Emily shook her head. "I was just doing my job." "No," the general said quietly. "You were doing what was right. There's a difference." Another knock on the door. This time it was a different soldier, older, with gray stubble and tired eyes. "General, hospital administration is insisting on a meeting. They're threatening to call the police." The general's expression didn't change. "Let them call. This facility is now under temporary federal jurisdiction. Anyone who interferes will be detained." The soldier nodded and left. Emily's head was spinning. Federal jurisdiction. Detained. This was escalating faster than she could process. She looked down at Captain Cross, at the steady rise and fall of his chest, and tried to ground herself in the one thing that made sense. Her patient was alive, and she needed to keep him that way. The general's phone buzzed. He answered it, listened for a moment, then ended the call without saying a word. He looked at Emily. "We've found the source." "The source?" "The pathogen." He gestured to his son. "It wasn't accidental exposure. Someone weaponized it and delivered it intentionally. We've traced the delivery method to a package that was left at his apartment 3 days ago. My son opened it, touched the contents, and within hours he was symptomatic." Emily felt a chill run through her. "Who would do that?" "That's what we're going to find out." The general's voice was ice. "But what matters now is that my son is alive because of you, and because you kept him alive long enough for us to get here. That makes you a target." Emily blinked. "A target?" "Anyone who knows you treated him. Anyone who knows you identified the pathogen is a potential threat. Whoever tried to kill my son might try to silence you to cover their tracks." The words hit her like a punch. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis, on keeping her patient alive, on processing the insanity of the last few hours, that she hadn't thought about what came next. But the general was right. If someone had gone to the trouble of poisoning a special operations officer, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a nurse who could connect the dots. "What do I do?" she asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. "You stay here," the general said, "under military protection. You don't leave this hospital, you don't speak to anyone outside this room without clearance, and you don't go anywhere without an armed escort. Understood?" Emily nodded, even though the idea of being under armed guard in her own workplace felt surreal. The general's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, frowned, then looked at the soldier standing by the door. "Bring Dr. Hale to me, now." The soldier left immediately. Emily's pulse quickened. Dr. Marcus Hale was the attending who'd initially admitted Captain Cross, the one who'd ordered standard treatment and then moved on. She'd always thought of him as competent but indifferent, the kind of doctor who did his job without getting emotionally invested. But now, with everything that had happened, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. Minutes passed in tense silence. The monitors beeped. The general stood like a statue. Emily checked the IV again, more out of nervous energy than necessity. The door opened and Dr. Hale walked in, flanked by two soldiers. He was in his 50s, balding, with the kind of soft build that came from years behind a desk. He looked confused and irritated, but not afraid. Not yet. "General, I don't know what's going on here, but I have patients to attend to and—" "Sit down," the general said. Dr. Hale hesitated, then sat. The general stepped closer, looming over him. "You were the admitting physician for this patient." "Yes, but I didn't know—" "What did you know?" Dr. Hale blinked. "I knew he was a John Doe, brought in with fever and a rash. I ordered standard tests and fluids. That's protocol." "And when the tests came back?" "They were inconclusive, elevated white count, signs of infection, but nothing specific." "Did anyone tell you to discharge him?" Dr. Hale's face went pale. "Dr. Cross mentioned it. He said the patient didn't have insurance and we needed the bed." "And you agreed?" I didn't push back, no, but I didn't discharge him either. I left that decision to the nursing staff." The general's voice dropped to something cold and lethal. "You left a dying man's fate to the nursing staff because you didn't want to deal with the paperwork." Dr. Hale opened his mouth, closed it, then looked down at his hands. "Get out of my sight," the general said. "You're suspended pending investigation. If I find out you were part of this, you'll wish you'd never gone to medical school." Dr. Hale stood shakily and left without another word. Emily watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and disgust. She'd worked with doctors like Hale for years, competent enough to keep their licenses, but too burned out or too apathetic to fight for their patients. She'd always found it frustrating. Now she found it criminal. The general turned to her. "How much longer until he's stable enough to transport?" Emily glanced at the monitors. "At least another 12 hours. Maybe more. Moving him now could destabilize his vitals." The general nodded. "Then we hold position. I'm bringing in a full medical team from Walter Reed. They'll work under your supervision." "My supervision?" Emily's voice cracked slightly. "You're the one who kept him alive, Nurse Warren. You're the one who knows his case. That makes you the lead." Emily wanted to argue, wanted to point out that she was just a floor nurse, not an ICU specialist, not a doctor, not anyone with the authority to lead a military medical team. But the look in the general's eyes stopped her. This wasn't a request. This wasn't a vote. This was an order, and he expected her to follow it. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. The general's phone buzzed for the third time in as many minutes. He answered it, listened, and his expression darkened. "How many?" A pause. "Lock it down. No one gets in or out." He ended the call and looked at the soldier by the door. "We have a problem. Someone just tried to access the hospital's security footage remotely. They were blocked, but they know we're here." The soldier's hand moved to his sidearm. "Orders? Double the perimeter. I want eyes on every entrance, every stairwell, every elevator. If anyone so much as looks at this floor the wrong way, I want to know about it." "Yes, sir." The soldier left and the general turned back to Emily. "It's starting." Emily didn't need to ask what he meant. Whoever had tried to kill Captain Cross was making their next move. and she was standing in the middle of the battlefield. She looked down at her patient, at the man she'd saved without knowing who he was, and felt a surge of defiance. They could come. They could try. But as long as she was breathing, as long as she had an IV line and a monitor and a working brain, Daniel Cross wasn't going to die on her watch. The general's phone buzzed again. He didn't answer it this time. He just stared at the screen, his jaw working, and Emily saw something flicker across his face, something that looked almost like fear. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, the general looked uncertain. They just identified the source of the pathogen. It came from inside the military. Someone with high-level clearance. Emily's blood went cold. "You mean—" "I mean, this wasn't an outside attack," the general said quietly. "Someone in our own ranks tried to kill my son. And if they're willing to do that, they won't stop until everyone who knows about it is dead." The monitors beeped, the fourth dripped, and somewhere in the hospital, footsteps echoed in the darkness, moving closer. Emily's hands went cold. She stared at the general, trying to process what he'd just said, but the words felt too big, too impossible. Someone inside the military. High-level clearance. A traitor willing to kill one of their own. The general's phone buzzed again. He silenced it without looking and turned to the soldier stationed outside the door. "I want a full lockdown. No one enters this floor without biometric verification and my personal authorization. Pull everyone who doesn't have critical patient care duties and get them out of the building." "Sir, the hospital staff is going to resist. I don't care if they resist. This is now a federal crime scene and an active threat zone. Anyone who refuses to comply gets detained. Make it clear." The soldier nodded and disappeared down the hallway, his boots echoing on the polished floor. Emily forced herself to move, to check Captain Cross's vitals again, even though she'd checked them 2 minutes ago. His oxygen saturation was holding at 94%, heart rate steady at 78. Blood pressure still low but not critical. The antibiotics were working, but slowly, too slowly. "How much time do we have?" the general asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Emily didn't look up from the monitor. "Before what?" "Before he's strong enough to talk, to tell me what happened, to give me names." She finally turned to face him. "He's been poisoned with a weaponized pathogen, sir. His body is fighting a battle on a cellular level. Even if he regains full consciousness in the next few hours, he's going to be disoriented, weak, possibly delirious. You can't interrogate him." "I'm not going to interrogate him," the general said quietly. "I'm going to protect him. But I need to know who did this, and he's the only one who can tell me." Emily understood the logic, but she also understood the reality of critical care. Pushing him too hard could kill him faster than the poison. The general's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just turned back to the window overlooking the city, his hands clasped behind his back. And for a moment he looked older than he had before, tired, worn down by the weight of command and the impossible choices it demanded. The door opened, and a woman in military fatigues entered, carrying a tablet and moving with the kind of brisk efficiency that marked her as someone used to operating under pressure. She was in her 40s, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that took in the room in a single sweep before settling on the general. "Sir, we've completed the initial sweep. 3 individuals flagged for irregular access patterns. 2 orderlies and 1 supply clerk. All 3 are in holding." "Irregular how?" the general asked. "They accessed restricted areas multiple times over the past 48 hours without logged authorization. Security footage shows them entering this room when no medical personnel were present." Emily felt her stomach twist. She thought about Trevor, the orderly who'd been ordered to disconnect the IV. How many others had been given similar instructions? How many people had walked into this room planning to let Captain Cross die? The general's expression didn't change. "Interrogate them separately. I want full statements, and I want them cross-referenced for inconsistencies. If any of them are lying, I want to know immediately." "Yes, sir." The woman hesitated. "Sir, there's something else. We pulled the hospital's pharmacy logs. Someone requisitioned a vial of potassium chloride 2 hours before the patient started showing signs of distress." Emily's blood went cold. Potassium chloride was a legitimate medication used in controlled doses, but in the wrong hands it was lethal. A quick, nearly undetectable way to stop a heart. If someone had injected it into Captain Cross's IV line, it would have looked like cardiac arrest brought on by infection. Who requisitioned it? The general asked, his voice dangerously calm. The woman checked her tablet. Dr. Adrian Cross. The name hung in the air like a blade. Emily thought about Dr. Cross being dragged out in handcuffs, thought about his face going pale when the soldiers grabbed him, and realized with a sickening clarity that he hadn't just been trying to discharge a patient to free up a bed. He'd been trying to finish what the poison started. The general turned to Emily. Did anyone administer potassium chloride to my son? Emily's mind raced. She thought back through the medication logs, through every IV push and drip she'd monitored since taking over the case. Not that I saw. I've been here since early yesterday, and I checked every medication personally before it went into his line. What about before you took over? I don't know. Emily grabbed the chart from the foot of the bed and flipped through the pages, scanning the nursing notes. There's a gap here. About 3 hours on the night shift before I came on duty. The notes are incomplete. The general's eyes narrowed. Who was on duty during that time? Emily checked the signature at the bottom of the page. Nurse Kelly Frost. Bring her to me, the general said to the woman with the tablet. The woman nodded and left. Emily's hands were shaking now. She set the chart down and forced herself to breathe. Kelly Frost was a veteran nurse, someone Emily had worked with for years. Competent, reliable, not the kind of person who made mistakes or cut corners. But if someone had gotten to her, if someone had convinced or coerced or paid her to look the other way. The general's phone buzzed. This time he answered it, listened for 10 seconds, and his face went rigid. Lock down the perimeter, now! He ended the call and turned to the soldier at the door. We have a breach. Someone just tried to enter the building through the loading dock using stolen credentials. They're in custody, but we have to assume there are others. The soldier's hand moved to his radio. Sir, should we evacuate the floor? No, we hold position. Moving the patient now is too risky, and scattering hospital staff creates too many variables. We stay here, and we defend. Emily's heart was pounding now. She looked at Captain Cross, at the fragile thread of life she was trying to maintain, and felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her like a physical force. This wasn't a hospital anymore. This was a war zone. The door opened and Kelly Frost was escorted in by 2 soldiers. She looked terrified, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. She was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing the same scrubs Emily had seen her in 1,000 times before. General, I don't understand what's happening. Sit down, the general said. Kelly sat. The general stepped closer, his presence filling the room. You were on duty in this room 3 nights ago. What happened during your shift? Kelly swallowed hard. I don't remember anything unusual. I checked his vitals, adjusted his fluids, documented everything. Did anyone else enter the room? Kelly hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. Who? The general demanded. Dr. Cross stopped by, Kelly said quietly. He said he wanted to review the patient's chart. I stepped out to get supplies, and when I came back, he was gone. How long were you out of the room? Maybe 5 minutes, 10 at most. The general turned to the woman with the tablet. Pull the surveillance footage from that time frame. I want to see exactly what my brother did in this room. The woman nodded and tapped at her screen. Emily felt sick. 5 minutes was more than enough time to inject a lethal dose of potassium chloride into an IV line. 5 minutes was more than enough time to commit murder and walk away clean. The general's phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen and his expression went dark. We've got another problem. Someone just accessed the hospital's internal network remotely and tried to delete patient records. They were blocked, but they got partial access to the system. Which records? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. This one. The general gestured to Captain Cross. They're trying to erase any evidence that he was ever here. Emily's mind was spinning. This wasn't just about killing Captain Cross anymore. This was about covering it up, about making sure there was no trail, no witnesses, no proof. And if they were willing to delete records, they were willing to eliminate anyone who could testify, including her. The door burst open and a soldier rushed in, breathing hard. Sir, we've got movement on the south stairwell. Two individuals, armed, moving toward this floor. Security cameras show them wearing hospital uniforms, but facial recognition doesn't match any staff. The general didn't hesitate. Seal the floor. I want every stairwell and elevator locked down. Deploy countermeasures and prepare for engagement. The soldier saluted and ran. Emily's knees felt weak. Armed intruders, moving toward this floor, toward this room. She looked at Captain Cross, at the IV line feeding antibiotics into his veins, at the monitors tracking his fragile recovery, and realized with brutal clarity that she couldn't move him, not now, not without killing him. The general turned to her. Can you keep him alive under fire? The question was insane. The question was impossible. But Emily looked at her patient and heard herself say, yes. The general pulled a radio from his belt and spoke into it, his voice clipped and precise. All units, this is General Cross. We have hostile forces inside the building. Rules of engagement are authorized. Protect the asset at all costs. Static crackled back. Copy that, sir. Engaging now. Somewhere below them, Emily heard the muffled sound of gunfire. Sharp cracks that echoed through the hospital corridors like firecrackers in a tin can. She flinched, her hands gripping the edge of the bed. The general moved to the door and positioned himself just inside the frame, his sidearm drawn, his eyes fixed on the hallway. Two more soldiers took positions on either side of him, rifles up, safeties off. Kelly Frost was pressed against the wall, her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Emily forced herself to focus. She checked Captain Cross's vitals again, still stable, thank God, and made sure the IV line was secure. If bullets started flying, if the room was breached, she needed to be ready to shield him, to keep the line intact, to do whatever it took. The gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was worse. The general's radio crackled. Sir, hostiles neutralized. Styles. 2 down, no casualties on our side. The general didn't lower his weapon. Confirmed? Confirmed. Both subjects are in custody. Medics are en route. Emily exhaled, her hands still shaking. The general holstered his sidearm and turned to her. They're going to keep coming. We need to move him. He's not stable enough. I don't care. The general's voice was iron. If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. I'm calling in a medevac. We're taking him to Walter Reed where we can control the environment. Emily opened her mouth to argue, but the look in the general's eyes stopped her. He wasn't asking. He was telling. How long do you need to prepare him for transport? The general asked. Emily looked at the monitors, at the IV lines, at the oxygen cannula. 20 minutes, maybe less if I can get help. You've got 10. The general turned to the woman with the tablet. Get me a medical transport team now, and I want a full escort, air and ground. Nothing gets near that helicopter without my authorization. The woman left at a run. Emily moved fast, her training taking over. She stabilized the IV lines with extra tape, adjusted the oxygen flow to maximize saturation, and prepped a portable monitor to track vitals during the move. Kelly Frost stepped forward, her hands still trembling, but her voice steady. What do you need? Emily rattled off a list. Emergency meds, backup fluids, sterile dressings, and Kelly moved without hesitation, grabbing supplies from the crash cart and handing them over. The general's radio crackled again. Sir, we've got a situation. Hospital administration is threatening to call the governor. They're saying we're violating patient rights and they want us out. The general's expression didn't change. Tell them if they interfere with a federal operation, they'll be charged with obstruction. And if the governor has a problem, he can take it up with the Secretary of Defense. Yes, sir. Emily was so focused on stabilizing the IV lines that she almost didn't hear the monitor alarm. But when it started beeping, sharp, insistent, urgent, her head snapped up. Captain Cross's heart rate was spiking. 100, 110, 120. What's happening? The general demanded. Emily grabbed the stethoscope and listened to his chest. His breathing was shallow, rapid, labored. His oxygen saturation was dropping, 90%, 88, 85. He's going into respiratory distress, Emily said, her voice tight. She grabbed an ambu bag from the crash cart and started manually ventilating him, forcing oxygen into his lungs with each squeeze. Kelly moved to the other side of the bed, checking his pupils, his skin color. He's cyanotic. We need to intubate. Emily's mind raced. Intubation required equipment, expertise, time, all things they didn't have. But if they didn't do it, Captain Cross would suffocate. "Get me an ET tube and a laryngoscope," Emily said. "Now!" Kelly ran. The general stepped closer, his face pale. "What's causing this?" Emily didn't have time to explain. She tilted Captain Cross's head back, opened his airway, and kept bagging him, her hands moving in practiced rhythm. Squeeze, release, his oxygen saturation was still dropping. 82, 80, 78. Kelly returned with the equipment. Emily grabbed the laryngoscope, positioned it in Captain Cross's mouth, and visualized his vocal cords. They were swollen, inflamed, closing. She slid the ET tube through the narrow opening with millimeters to spare and secured it in place. Kelly connected the ambu bag to the tube and started ventilating again. Captain Cross's oxygen saturation began to climb. 80, 85, 90. Emily exhaled, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The general was staring at his son, his hands clenched into fists. "What just happened?" "Anaphylaxis," Emily said, her voice shaking. "Or an allergic reaction to one of the medications. Or—" She stopped, her mind catching on something. She turned to Kelly. "What medications did you give him on your shift 3 nights ago?" Kelly pulled out her phone and checked her notes. "Standard antibiotics, fluids, and—" She paused. "Dr. Cross told me to add a corticosteroid to reduce inflammation. I documented it in the chart." Emily's blood went cold. "What kind of corticosteroid?" "Dexamethasone." Emily grabbed the chart and flipped through the pages, scanning the medication list. Dexamethasone was listed, but underneath it, in smaller handwriting, was another note. A note she'd missed before because it was buried in the middle of the page. "Patient has documented allergy to corticosteroids. Severe reaction. Do not administer." Emily's hands started shaking. "He's allergic. Dr. Cross knew he was allergic, and he ordered it anyway." The general's face went white. "He tried to kill him with the medication." Emily nodded, unable to speak. The general's radio crackled. "Sir, medevac is inbound. ETA, 3 minutes." The general didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at his son, and Emily saw something break inside him, something cold and terrible and final. "I'm going to destroy him," the general said quietly. "I'm going to take everything he has and burn it to the ground." The building shook, not from gunfire, from the sound of rotor blades overhead, massive, deafening, the kind of sound that made the windows rattle and the floor vibrate. The general's radio crackled. "Medevac on the roof. Ready for patient transfer." Emily disconnected the monitors, secured the IV lines, and prepared to move. Kelly grabbed the ambu bag and kept ventilating. 2 soldiers entered with a stretcher, and they lifted Captain Cross with practiced precision, moving him from the bed to the stretcher in seconds. They moved as a unit. Emily on one side, Kelly on the other, soldiers front and back, the general leading the way. The hallway was empty now, eerily silent except for the sound of their footsteps and the rhythmic squeeze of the ambu bag. They reached the stairwell and climbed. 1 floor, 2, 3. The rooftop door burst open and wind slammed into them, cold and vicious, the downdraft from the helicopter turning the rain into horizontal needles. The helicopter was massive, military-grade, armored, rotor blades spinning so fast they were almost invisible. The side door was open, a medic reaching out to help pull the stretcher inside. Emily climbed in after it, Kelly right behind her. The general followed, and the door slammed shut. The helicopter lifted off, the city falling away beneath them. Inside, the noise was overwhelming. Emily reconnected the monitors, checked the IV lines, and watched Captain Cross's vitals stabilize. 94% oxygen, heart rate dropping back to normal, blood pressure holding. The general was on his phone, his voice barely audible over the engine roar. "I want every record, every communication, every financial transaction tied to my brother for the last 6 months, and I want the name of everyone who knew about my son's location." He paused, listening, and his expression went rigid. "Say that again." Another pause. "How many?" He looked at Emily, and for the first time since she'd met him, the general looked genuinely afraid. We've just intercepted communications, he said. There's a kill order out, not just on my son, on everyone involved in his treatment. That includes you, Nurse Warren. Someone just put a price on your head. The words hit Emily like a physical blow. A kill order. A price on her head. She stared at the general, waiting for him to say it was a mistake, a miscommunication, anything other than what she'd just heard. But his face remained stone, and she knew he was telling the truth. The helicopter banked hard to the left, throwing her against the bulkhead. She grabbed a handhold to steady herself, her other hand still gripping the IV line running into Captain Cross's arm. The monitors showed his vitals holding steady despite the turbulence. Oxygen at 94%, heart rate at 82, blood pressure stabilizing. He was alive. For now. Kelly Frost sat across from her, still squeezing the ambu bag in rhythmic pulses, her face pale but focused. Two medics worked beside her, checking lines, adjusting equipment, moving with the kind of efficiency that came from years of emergency transport. But Emily barely registered any of it. Her mind was stuck on the general's words, replaying them over and over. "How much?" Emily heard herself ask. The general looked up from his phone. "What?" "The price. How much am I worth dead?" His jaw tightened. $50,000, posted on 3 separate dark web forums within the last 20 minutes. Emily felt her stomach drop. 50,000 wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to motivate someone desperate, enough to turn a stranger into an assassin, enough to make her a target for anyone with a gun and a need for cash. "They posted my name?" she asked. "Your name, your photo, your address, your work schedule?" The general's voice was cold. "Everything." Emily closed her eyes. Her apartment was in a cheap complex on the east side, the kind of place where doors didn't lock properly and neighbors didn't ask questions. If someone wanted to find her, they wouldn't have to look hard. "What about my family?" Her voice cracked. "My brother." "Already in protective custody," the general said. "We pulled him 20 minutes ago. He's safe." Emily exhaled, the relief so sudden and overwhelming that she felt her knees go weak even though she was already sitting. "Thank you." The general didn't respond. He just went back to his phone, his fingers moving across the screen with mechanical precision. The helicopter began to descend. Emily looked out the window and saw Walter Reed Medical Center sprawling below them, massive, fortified, surrounded by security fences and armed guards. The landing pad was lit up like a stage, figures in military fatigues moving in coordinated patterns, weapons ready. They touched down hard. The door slammed open and soldiers poured in, grabbing the stretcher, lifting Captain Cross with practiced speed. Emily followed, Kelly right behind her, the wind from the rotors tearing at her clothes and hair. They moved through a secured corridor, past checkpoints and locked doors, into an elevator that descended 3 floors into what Emily realized was an underground medical facility. The walls were reinforced concrete. The lighting was harsh and clinical. The air smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. They reached a private room, no windows, 2 doors, both guarded, and transferred Captain Cross to a bed surrounded by state-of-the-art monitoring equipment. Emily reconnected the lines, checked the ventilator settings, and watched the screens light up with data. A doctor entered, military uniform, captain's bars, dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She moved to the bedside and checked the chart without introducing herself. "You're the nurse who kept him alive." It wasn't a question, but Emily nodded anyway. The doctor looked up, her eyes sharp. "I'm Captain Sarah Lynn. I'll be taking over his care from here. You've done excellent work under impossible circumstances, but this is a secure military medical facility, and protocol requires—" "She stays," the general said from the doorway. Captain Lynn turned. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a classified patient in a classified facility. Civilian medical personnel don't have clearance." "She has my clearance," the general said. "And until my son is stable, she doesn't leave his side. Is that understood?" Captain Lynn's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "Understood, sir." The general stepped closer to the bed, looking down at his son. For a moment his expression softened, just a fraction, just enough to show the father beneath the officer. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "I need him conscious," the general said. "How long?" Captain Lynn checked the monitors. "He's intubated and sedated. We could try lightening the sedation, but given the stress his system has been under. How long? The general repeated. 6 hours, Captain Lin said. Maybe less if we're aggressive, but there are risks. Do it. Captain Lin hesitated, then nodded and began adjusting medication drips. The general turned to Emily. You're staying here. Armed guard outside both doors. You don't leave this room. You don't speak to anyone outside this facility, and you don't use your phone. Understood? Emily nodded, too numb to argue. The general left. The door locked behind him with a heavy metallic click. Emily sank into a chair beside the bed, her body finally acknowledging the exhaustion that had been building for hours. Her hands were still shaking, her clothes were still damp from the rain. She smelled like sweat and antiseptic and fear. Captain Lin finished adjusting the medications and turned to Kelly. I need a full report on every intervention performed in the last 24 hours. Start talking. Kelly did, her voice steady despite the circumstances, running through the timeline with clinical precision. Emily listened, half-focused, her eyes on Captain Cross's face. He looked younger without the tension of consciousness, vulnerable, almost peaceful. It was hard to reconcile this man with the elite soldier the general had described. Captain Lin asked questions, made notes, and finally nodded. You both did good work. He should be dead. The fact that he's not is a testament to your skill. Emily didn't feel skilled. She felt lucky. Lucky that she'd recognized the symptoms. Lucky that she'd refused to follow orders. Lucky that she'd been stubborn enough to stay in the room when everyone else would have walked away. But luck ran out eventually. The hours crawled past. Captain Lin cycled in and out, checking vitals, adjusting medications, conferring with specialists via secure video link. Kelly dozed in a corner chair, her head tilted back against the wall. Emily stayed awake, watching the monitors, watching Captain Cross breathe. At some point, food appeared. Military rations in sealed packages, bottled water, coffee that tasted like burned dirt. Emily forced herself to eat, knowing she needed the energy even if her stomach was in knots. The door opened and the general returned, his face grim. He didn't say anything at first, just stood by the bed and looked at his son. Then he turned to Emily. We've identified the source, he said quietly. Emily straightened in her chair. The person who posted the kill order? The person who ordered the hit on my son. The general's voice was ice. And the person who's been feeding information to the enemy for the last 18 months. Emily's pulse quickened. Who? The general pulled out his phone and showed her a photo. Emily stared at the screen, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. Dr. Adrian Cross, but not alone. Standing next to him in the photo was a man in a suit, older, distinguished, with the kind of face that belonged on television. Emily recognized him immediately. Senator Richard Mallory, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, one of the most powerful men in Washington. Senator Mallory has been selling classified intelligence to foreign actors for over a year, the general said. My son was leading the investigation. He was close to exposing the network when he was poisoned. My brother, his voice hardened, was paid $2 million to make sure he didn't survive. Emily felt sick. Dr. Cross sold out his own nephew for money? He sold out his country for money, the general said. My son was just collateral damage. The door opened again and a soldier entered, handing the general a tablet. He read the screen, his expression darkening with each line. We've just received confirmation, the general said. Senator Mallory has been arrested. FBI is executing search warrants on his home, his office, and his staff. They've already recovered encrypted communications confirming his involvement. He looked at Emily. One of those communications is an email to my brother, dated 3 days ago, with your name in it. Emily's blood went cold. What did it say? The general turned the tablet so she could see. The email was short, clinical, brutal. The nurse is a liability. Eliminate her once the asset is confirmed dead. Make it look like an accident. Payment on completion. Emily read it twice, her hands trembling. Someone had written those words about her. Someone had decided she was expendable. Someone had put a price on her life with the same casual indifference they might use to order office supplies. We have the original email, the general said, sent from Senator Mallory's personal server, received by my brother. It's irrefutable evidence of conspiracy to commit murder. Emily couldn't speak. She just stared at the screen, at the words that had almost killed her. The general took the tablet back. My brother is in federal custody. He'll be charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, treason. Senator Mallory is facing the same charges, plus espionage. They're both going to prison for the rest of their lives. Emily looked up at him. And the kill order? Rescinded. The forums have been taken down, the postings deleted, and we've issued warnings to every known contractor in the network. You're no longer a target. Emily exhaled, the relief so overwhelming it made her dizzy. But beneath the relief was something else, anger. Cold, sharp, relentless anger. I want to see him, she said. The general frowned. See who? Dr. Cross. Emily's voice was steady now, hard. I want to look him in the eye, and I want him to know that I'm still alive, that he failed. The general studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll arrange it. 3 hours later, Emily was escorted through a series of locked corridors into a secure holding area deep beneath the medical facility. The walls were bare concrete, the lighting fluorescent and harsh. Armed guards stood at every intersection. They stopped outside a heavy metal door with a small reinforced window. The general nodded to the guard, who unlocked it and stepped aside. Emily walked in. Dr. Adrian Cross sat at a metal table, his hands cuffed in front of him, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. He looked older than she remembered, smaller, diminished, stripped of the arrogance that had once made him untouchable. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes, fear, maybe, or regret. Nurse Warren, he said quietly. Emily didn't sit. She just stood there, looking down at him, and let the silence stretch. I suppose you're here to gloat, Dr. Cross said finally. No, Emily said. I'm here to make sure you understand something. He waited. You treated patients like numbers on a balance sheet, Emily said. You saw a dying man and you saw a financial problem. You were willing to let him die, willing to kill him because it was easier than doing your job. And when I refused to let that happen, when I did what any decent nurse would do, you tried to destroy me for it. Dr. Cross looked away. But I'm still here, Emily continued, and your nephew is still alive, and you're sitting in a cell facing life in prison because you forgot the most important rule of medicine. Dr. Cross looked up. What rule? First, do no harm. Emily's voice was cold. You broke that rule, and now you're going to pay for it for the rest of your life. She turned and walked out without waiting for a response. The door locked behind her. The general was waiting in the corridor. Feel better? He asked. Emily thought about it. No, but I needed to say it. The general nodded. He's being transferred to a federal detention facility in the morning. Senator Mallory is already there. They'll both be arraigned within 48 hours. They walked back through the corridors in silence. When they reached the medical wing, the general stopped. My son is waking up, he said. Emily's heart jumped. Is he stable? Captain Lynn says yes. She's reducing the sedation now. He should be conscious within the hour. The general hesitated. I'd like you to be there when he wakes up. He should see the person who saved his life. Emily nodded, unable to speak. They returned to the room. Captain Lynn was adjusting the ventilator settings, preparing to extubate. Kelly stood by with suction equipment ready to clear the airway. 2 other medical staff hovered nearby, monitoring vitals. Emily took her position at the bedside and watched the monitors. Captain Cross's oxygen saturation was holding at 96%. Heart rate steady at 75. Blood pressure normal. Captain Lynn removed the breathing tube with practiced efficiency. Captain Cross coughed, his body convulsing, his eyes flying open in panic. You're safe, Emily said immediately, her hand on his shoulder. You're at Walter Reed. You're going to be okay. Captain Cross's eyes found hers. He tried to speak, but his voice was raw, barely a whisper. Don't talk yet, Emily said. Just breathe. He did, his chest rising and falling in shaky gasps. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the monitors, the guards, his father standing in the corner. Slowly, understanding dawned. The general stepped forward. Welcome back, son. Captain Cross tried to sit up, but Emily pressed him back gently. Not yet. You need to rest. He shook his head, his hand grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "You," he rasped. "You're the nurse." Emily nodded. "They said—" He coughed, his voice breaking. "They said you were fired. For saving me." "I was," Emily said. "But it didn't stick." Captain Cross looked at his father. "Uncle Adrian?" "In custody," the general said. "Along with Senator Mallory. It's over." Captain Cross closed his eyes, his grip on Emily's wrist loosening. "How long was I out?" 3 days, the general said. 3 days, Captain Cross repeated. He opened his eyes again, looking at Emily. "You stayed with me." "Someone had to," Emily said. "She kept you alive when everyone else was ready to let you die," the general said quietly. "She disobeyed orders, lost her job, and put her own life at risk because she believed you deserved to live. You owe her everything." Captain Cross stared at Emily, and she saw something shift in his expression. Gratitude, respect, something deeper she couldn't quite name. "Thank you," he said. Emily nodded, her throat tight. "Just doing my job." "No," Captain Cross said. "You did a lot more than that." The door burst open and a soldier rushed in, his face urgent. "General, we have a situation. Someone just breached the outer perimeter. Armed individual, moving toward the facility. Security is engaging now." The general's hand moved to his sidearm. "Lock down the building. Get everyone to secure positions." "Sir, the individual is asking for Nurse Warren by name." Emily's blood went cold. The general turned to her, his face grim. "It's not over," he said. Alarms began to wail throughout the facility. The alarms tore through the facility like sirens, sharp and relentless, turning the sterile corridors into a maze of flashing red lights and echoing chaos. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs as soldiers poured into the room, weapons drawn, forming a protective barrier around Captain Cross's bed. The general was already on his radio, his voice cutting through the noise with military precision. "Status report, now." Static crackled back. "Armed individual, male, approximately 40 years old, breached the outer gate using stolen military credentials. He's demanding to speak with Nurse Emily Warren. Says he has information about the conspiracy. Security has him pinned at checkpoint 3, but he's refusing to stand down." The general's eyes snapped to Emily. "Do you know anyone who would come here looking for you?" Emily's mind raced through faces, names, anyone who might have a reason to track her down to a secure military facility. She came up empty. "No, I can't think of anyone." "He's carrying a briefcase," the voice on the radio continued. "Says it contains evidence. Won't let anyone touch it. Keeps repeating your name." Captain Lynn moved to shield Captain Cross, her hand hovering near the ventilator controls in case they needed to sedate him again. Kelly Frost pressed herself against the wall, her face pale. The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in with every second. "Put him on speaker," the general ordered. A new voice crackled through the radio, male, breathless, urgent. "My name is Dr. Marcus Hale. I was the attending physician at Crescent General when Captain Cross was admitted. I need to speak to Nurse Warren. I have evidence, documents, recordings that prove there are more people involved in this conspiracy than you know. Please. I'm not armed. I'm not a threat. I'm trying to help." Emily's breath caught. Dr. Marcus Hale, the soft-spoken attending who'd admitted Captain Cross as a John Doe and then disappeared into the background. She'd barely thought about him since the night she was fired. The general looked at her. "Do you trust him?" Emily thought about the few interactions she'd had with Dr. Hale, his quiet competence, his tendency to avoid confrontation, the way he'd stepped back when Dr. Adrian Cross started issuing orders. He'd never struck her as brave, but he'd never struck her as corrupt either. "I don't know," Emily said honestly, "but if he has evidence, we need to see it." The general's jaw tightened. He spoke into the radio. "Bring him to the secure briefing room. Full search, scan the briefcase, and keep him under armed guard. I'll be there in 2 minutes." "Sir, protocol dictates—" "I gave you an order," the general said, his voice like steel. "Yes, sir." The general turned to Captain Lynn. "Stay with my son. No one gets in or out of this room without my authorization." Then to Emily, "You're coming with me." Emily started to protest. Her place was with her patient, not in some interrogation room, but the look in the general's eyes stopped her. This wasn't a request. They moved through the corridors at a rapid pace, soldiers flanking them on all sides, boots echoing off concrete. Emily's mind churned. More people involved. What did that mean? How deep did this conspiracy go? They reached the briefing room, a windowless space with a single metal table, 4 chairs, and cameras mounted in every corner. Dr. Hale sat in one of the chairs, his hands cuffed in front of him, 2 soldiers standing behind him with rifles ready. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed, his hair disheveled. On the table in front of him sat a black briefcase, already opened and searched. The general sat down across from him. Emily remained standing by the door, her arms crossed. "You have 60 seconds to convince me not to have you arrested for trespassing on a military installation," the general said. Dr. Hale swallowed hard. "I was there the night Captain Cross was admitted. I was the one who ordered the initial blood work and fluids. But when Dr. Adrian Cross found out who the patient was, he pulled me aside and told me to discharge him immediately. I refused at first, said the patient was too unstable, but Dr. Cross threatened to have me fired, to destroy my medical license, to make sure I never worked in a hospital again." "So you complied," the general said, his voice flat. "I stepped back," Dr. Hale said quietly. "I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore. I told myself someone else would intervene." He looked at Emily. "And someone did. You did. And when I heard you'd been fired for it, I realized I couldn't stay silent anymore." He reached for the briefcase, his movements slow and deliberate so the soldiers wouldn't react. He pulled out a stack of documents and spread them across the table. "These are financial records showing payments from Senator Mallory to Dr. Adrian Cross over the last 18 months. $2 million, just like you said, but there's more." He pulled out another stack. "These are communications between Senator Mallory and 3 other members of Congress. They were all part of the network, all selling classified intelligence, all being paid through shell companies and offshore accounts." The general leaned forward, scanning the documents. His expression didn't change, but Emily saw his hands tighten into fists. "Where did you get these?" the general asked. Dr. Cross kept copies on a private server at the hospital. He thought he was being careful, thought no one would ever find them. "But I'm the hospital's IT administrator. I have access to everything." Dr. Hale's voice was shaking now. "When I heard about the arrest this morning, I copied everything I could find and brought it here. I didn't know where else to go." The general picked up one of the documents and read it in silence. Then another. Then a third. When he finally looked up, his expression was glacial. "This implicates 6 members of Congress, 2 defense contractors, and a deputy director at the CIA." Dr. Hale nodded. "I know." The general stood and pulled out his phone, dialing a number from memory. "This is General Nathan Cross. I need a secure line to the Director of National Intelligence, now." He paused. "I don't care if she's in a meeting. Get her on the phone, or I'll go over your head to the president." Emily watched as the general stepped out of the room, his voice dropping to a low murmur as he spoke. Dr. Hale sat in silence, his hands still cuffed, his eyes fixed on the table. Emily moved closer. "Why did you wait so long?" "Doctor." Hale looked up at her and she saw shame written across his face. "Because I was a coward. Because I told myself it wasn't my responsibility. Because I chose my career over doing what was right." He swallowed hard. "But when I saw what happened to you, how you lost everything for refusing to walk away, I realized I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. You risked everything to save a stranger. The least I could do was bring you the truth." Emily didn't respond. She wasn't sure what to say. Part of her was angry at him for not acting sooner, for stepping back when he should have stepped up. But another part of her understood. Fear was a powerful thing. It made people do nothing when they should do everything. The general returned, his face grim. "The DNI is initiating emergency protocols. FBI is executing warrants as we speak. Every name in those documents will be in custody within the hour." He looked at Dr. Hale. "You just handed us the biggest espionage ring in 20 years. That takes courage." Dr. Hale shook his head. "It's not courage. It's just doing what I should have done from the beginning." The general gestured to the soldiers. "Uncuff him. Get him a secure room and protective detail. He's a federal witness now." The soldiers complied, and Dr. Hale stood shakily, rubbing his wrists. He looked at Emily one more time. "I'm sorry."
for not standing with you when it mattered. Emily nodded. You're standing now. That's what counts. Dr. Hale left with the soldiers, and Emily was alone with the general. You were right, the general said quietly. About him. Emily didn't feel vindicated. She just felt tired. What happens now? Now we finish this. The general gathered the documents and placed them back in the briefcase. My brother and Senator Mallory are just the beginning. This network goes deep, and we're going to tear it out root and branch. But that's my fight, not yours. Emily frowned. What do you mean? The general looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, his expression softened. You've done more than anyone had a right to ask. You saved my son. You exposed corruption. You put your life on the line without hesitation. But you're not a soldier, Nurse Warren. You're not trained for what comes next. Emily felt a flash of frustration. So what? I just go back to my normal life? Pretend none of this happened? No, the general said. You go back to doing what you do best, saving lives, but not at Crescent General, and not under administrators who value profits over patients. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, handing it to her. Emily opened it. Inside was a letter on official military letterhead, signed by the Surgeon General of the United States. Miss Emily Warren is hereby appointed as Senior Medical Consultant to the Department of Defense Special Operations Medical Division, with the rank and privileges equivalent to a GS-14 federal employee. She will serve as lead civilian advisor on tactical medicine, emergency response protocols, and critical care procedures for classified operations. This appointment is effective immediately and carries a top-secret security clearance. Emily read it twice, her hands shaking. I don't understand. My son's unit needs someone like you, the general said. Someone who doesn't back down when the orders don't make sense. Someone who values human life over bureaucracy. Someone who can make life or death decisions under pressure and live with the consequences. He paused. The job is yours if you want it. No pressure, no obligation, but know this. You've earned the respect of every person in this building, including me. Emily stared at the letter, her mind reeling. A federal position, top secret clearance, working with special operations forces. It was everything she'd never imagined and everything she suddenly realized she wanted. Can I think about it? She asked. Take all the time you need, the general said. But my son is going to ask you the same question when he's back on his feet, and he's a lot more persuasive than I am. Emily laughed despite herself, the sound surprising in the tension of the room. They returned to the medical wing. The alarms had stopped, the corridors quiet again except for the steady rhythm of boots on concrete. When they entered Captain Cross's room, he was sitting up slightly, the color returning to his face, his eyes alert. Captain Lynn was checking his vitals, her expression professional but pleased. He's doing well. Oxygen saturation at 98%, all signs pointing toward full recovery. Captain Cross looked at Emily as she entered. Did I hear alarms or was I hallucinating? You heard alarms, Emily said. But everything's fine now. Define fine, Captain Cross said, a hint of dry humor in his raspy voice. The general stepped forward. We've apprehended everyone involved in the conspiracy. Senator Mallory, your uncle, and 6 others are in federal custody. The network is dismantled. Captain Cross closed his eyes briefly, relief washing over his face. Good. It's over, son, the general said quietly. You can rest now. Captain Cross opened his eyes and looked at Emily. You were there the whole time, weren't you? Even when they told you to leave. Emily nodded. Why? The question was simple, but the answer wasn't. Emily thought about all the reasons: training, duty, stubbornness, the belief that every life mattered regardless of who could pay for it. But in the end, it came down to something simpler. Because it was the right thing to do, Emily said. Captain Cross held her gaze. I'm alive because you refused to follow orders that were wrong. That's not just being a good nurse, that's being a good person. Emily felt her throat tighten. She'd spent the last 3 days fighting to keep him alive, fighting to clear her name, fighting to survive. She hadn't had time to process what any of it meant. But now, standing in this room with the patient she'd saved and the people who finally believed in her, it all came crashing down. Thank you, she managed to say. The general's phone buzzed.
He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. They're transferring Adrian Cross and Senator Mallory to federal court for arraignment in 1 hour. It's going to be public. Media is already gathering. Captain Cross looked at his father. I want to be there. You're not strong enough. I want to be there, Captain Cross repeated, his voice firmer now. They tried to kill me. They need to see that they failed. The general looked at Captain Lin, who hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. If we transport him carefully and keep him under medical supervision, it's possible. But it's a risk. Everything is a risk, Captain Cross said. I'm going. The general didn't argue. He turned to Emily. What about you? Emily thought about facing Dr. Adrian Cross again, thought about standing in a courtroom and watching him answer for what he'd done. Part of her wanted that closure. Part of her just wanted it to be over. I'll go, she said. They transported Captain Cross in an armored medical vehicle, Emily and Captain Lin riding with him, monitoring his vitals every minute. The drive to the federal courthouse took 30 minutes, the streets blocked off by security, helicopters circling overhead. When they arrived, the crowd was massive. Media vans lined the streets, cameras pointed at the courthouse steps, reporters shouting questions into microphones. Protesters held signs, some supporting the accused, some demanding justice. It was chaos. They entered through a secured side entrance and were escorted to a private viewing room overlooking the main courtroom. Emily watched through reinforced glass as the defendants were brought in one by one. Senator Richard Mallory walked with his head down, his expensive suit wrinkled, his hands cuffed. He looked smaller than he did on television, diminished by the weight of his crimes. Dr. Adrian Cross followed, flanked by federal marshals. His face was blank, expressionless, but Emily saw the way his eyes darted around the courtroom, looking for an escape that didn't exist. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s with gray hair and a reputation for being merciless with corruption cases. She didn't waste time. The defendants are charged with conspiracy to commit murder, espionage, treason, and obstruction of justice, the judge said, her voice echoing through the courtroom. How do you plead? Senator Mallory's lawyer stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. Doctor. Adrian Cross's lawyers did the same. The judge's expression didn't change. Bail is denied. The defendants will remain in federal custody pending trial. Next hearing is scheduled for— Your Honor, a voice interrupted. Emily looked down and saw the federal prosecutor standing, holding a folder. The government has new evidence we'd like to submit for the record. The judge gestured for him to continue. The prosecutor opened the folder and pulled out the documents Dr. Hale had provided. These records show a conspiracy involving not just the defendants before you today, but 6 additional members of Congress, 2 defense contractors, and a deputy director at the CIA. We're requesting additional charges and additional arrests. The courtroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The judge slammed her gavel, demanding order. Emily watched Dr. Adrian Cross's face go white. He'd thought he was protecting himself by keeping those records. Instead, he'd sealed his fate and the fate of everyone he'd conspired with. The judge reviewed the documents in silence, her expression growing darker with each page. Finally, she looked up. The charges are amended to include racketeering and organized criminal conspiracy. Bail remains denied. And gentlemen, she looked directly at Senator Mallory and Dr. Cross, you are looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. I suggest you cooperate with federal investigators if you have any hope of leniency. She slammed the gavel. Court adjourned. The defendants were led out in handcuffs, and Emily felt a surge of satisfaction so intense it almost hurt. They were done. Finished. Their power, their arrogance, their willingness to destroy lives for money, all of it was over. Captain Cross sat in his wheelchair, watching through the glass, his jaw tight. It's not enough, he said quietly. The general put a hand on his son's shoulder. It never is, but it's justice. They left the courthouse the same way they'd come in, through the secured entrance, away from the cameras and the chaos. By the time they returned to Walter Reed, the news was everywhere. Every channel, every website, every feed. The conspiracy was exposed. The names were public. The arrests were ongoing. Emily's phone returned to her now that the kill order was rescinded, buzzed nonstop with messages. Former colleagues, friends, family, even strangers who'd seen her name in the news and wanted to thank her. She turned it off. Back in Captain Cross's room, the atmosphere was different, quieter, calmer. The crisis was over, and now there was just the slow work of recovery. Captain Lin checked his vitals one last time and nodded with satisfaction. "You're stable. If you keep improving at this rate, you'll be out of here in a week." Captain Cross smiled faintly. "Can't wait." The general excused himself to handle the flood of calls from Washington. Captain Lin left to file her reports. Kelly Frost had already been sent home with commendations and a recommendation for a position at Walter Reed if she wanted it. Emily started to leave too, but Captain Cross stopped her. "Wait," he said. She turned. "My father offered you a job, didn't he?" Captain Cross asked. Emily nodded. "Are you going to take it?" Emily hesitated. She thought about going back to Crescent General, back to the politics and the bureaucracy and the constant battle between doing what was right and doing what was profitable. She thought about the letter in her pocket, the opportunity to work with people who understood that saving lives was more important than saving money. "I think I am," she said. Captain Cross smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. "Good. Because I'm going to need someone I can trust watching my back when I get back in the field." Emily felt her own smile forming. "You're assuming I'd work with you specifically. I'm assuming you're too good at your job to waste on anyone else," Captain Cross said. Emily laughed, the sound surprising her. It felt good. It felt right. She stayed for another hour, talking with him about nothing important, books, movies, the weather, until his eyes started to droop and Captain Lin came back to shoo her out so he could rest. Emily walked through the corridors of Walter Reed past the soldiers and the doctors and the machines that kept people alive, and felt something shift inside her. She'd started this journey fired, humiliated, walking home in the rain with nothing but a cardboard box. She was ending it with a federal appointment, a cleared name, and the knowledge that she'd done exactly what she was supposed to do. She'd saved a life. She'd exposed corruption. She'd refused to back down when everyone told her to, and now she was walking out with her head high, her future secure, and an entire military installation at her back. 3 months later, Emily stood in the briefing room at Joint Base Andrews, wearing new tactical medical gear with her name stitched above the pocket and a federal ID badge clipped to her belt. Captain Cross stood beside her, fully recovered, leading a mission brief for his unit. "The target is a remote facility in hostile territory," he was saying, pointing to a map on the screen. "Medical support will be critical. Nurse Warren will be embedded with the team, providing real-time triage and emergency care." Emily listened, her mind already running through protocols, equipment checks, contingency plans. This was her life now. High stakes, high pressure. Exactly what she'd been built for. After the briefing, as the team dispersed, Captain Cross turned to her. "Ready for your first field deployment?" Emily thought about the scared nurse who'd refused to discharge a dying patient. She thought about the woman who'd been fired for doing the right thing. She thought about how far she'd come. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. Captain Cross grinned. "Good, because we leave in 6 hours." Emily walked out of the briefing room into the bright afternoon sun, past soldiers preparing equipment, past helicopters spinning up on the tarmac, past a future she'd built by refusing to compromise. She'd been underestimated once, dismissed, discarded. They'd never make that mistake again.